Okay, so let me welcome everybody back to the room. So Chi, if you can already project the PowerPoint of Ministry of Oil,
Okay.
I believe that's the first presentation, right?
Yeah.
Can I just confirm from the floor now that people are back? Yeah, excellent, great. So I think so because we're already running behind, I will go ahead and start. I know some people are still coming in, but I believe we should go ahead and start. So, Mr. Youssef, can I please ask Ministry of Oil to come and present Mr. Saad Aziz? And then if I can ask you, Mr. Aziz, to go uh, onto the podium, if you can present from the podium, so we see you more closer, more closer. We see you in our cameras better. So can I ask somebody from the floor to please take the microphone and just confirm to us that you can hear us?
نعم نعم نسمع.
We can hear you.
Thank you. So is Mr. Saad Abdul Aziz already at the podium? Because I'm not getting a visual right now. Okay, perfect. Are you able to stand in the podium, Mr. Aziz, or this is better for you? Okay, here you are. Okay, I see you
نعم
now. I see you. Sorry.
نعم
You're
موجود وأنا مستعد إن شاء الله.
okay, then I need the translators, the interpreters to please come online now. We will start the
Yes, can you hear me? Okay, great.
will pass. Just tell us to pass when you're ready to pass the slide.
Yes.
Okay?
نعم. Thank you very much.
Okay, شكرا.
ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Hello, my name is Saad Abdelaziz Hussein. I'm the director for the HSE division at the Ministry of Oil. At the beginning, I would like to thank the UNEP in addition to the experts of BRS experts, and I would love to thank my colleagues at the Ministry of Oil and Ministry of Health and Environment for their attendance, and for Mr. Youssef Muayyad for his support to the workshop. I would love to tell you that the Ministry of Oil is the main economic artery of Iraq, and it's a resource-based economy because more than 90% it relies on oil production. So this is
Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Aziz. Let me just, before you start your presentation, let me just flag to you that we have about 25 minutes for your presentation so that we can then have questions and answers after. Okay, I will come back online after
نعم.
25 minutes to let you know. Okay.
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 Can I start?
Please go ahead and start.
Yeah. بداية مثل ما يعني
So as I said, that Iraq, the main artery of its economy is oil production, crude oil production. So the crude oil production process results in oil and hazardous wastes, especially that the production has increased after Iraq signed contracts with international oil companies, and so this resulted, or these oil contracts have resulted in increased production, and in it, by consequence, the addition in the types and the amounts of hazardous waste. And we thought that oil projects, as categorized by the Ministry of Environment as category A, I think, I can't hear him while he's breaking. And as it is in the presentation, because of these extraction processes, waste would be generated across all the processes, the production, the extraction, and this would lead to environmental harms for lands close to the field. Next slide, please. Close to the oil production fields. Thank you. As you can see, these are the types of oil wastes resulting from oil production operations, as Mr. Mike has said. And most importantly are the drilling muds, and these are hazardous wastes. And they are divided into two types: water-based mud and water-based mud. In Iraq, we always used the
إنه كونه أقل ضررا على البيئة، وبالتالي
I
نوع
lost. Sorry. I lost. We lost the interpretation in English.
okay, can you hear me now? Okay, sorry. Okay.
Can I continue?
Yes, please go ahead. Sorry about that.
فبالتالي هذه الأطيان
So these muds contain heavy metals and hazardous material that cause soil pollution. The other wastes are these are the least, and these are oil wastes resulting from the oil spills, and we would explain this during the presentation. The muds resulting from the wastewater treatment, and these are one of the harmful of the hazardous wastes that result in sludge from the treatment of synthetic water in oil refineries, damaged chemicals, and this is causing many problems, because we have huge amounts of them in our storages, and committees have been formed to handle this issue. Empty drums, metal and plastic drums, and these are in the tens of thousands in the oil production companies' storages, supporting agents used and consumed, and so these reagents, and these needs to be disposed of, and they should be damaged. And we know that these supportive agents or reagents are such as the platinum, and they can be returned to the producing company, but the other reagents that are metal free, these should be environmentally and soundly disposed of. The sands used in the filtration process, and this is for the gas purification, this poses a problem for us for the types of oil wastes. The chemical plastic bags that are used in the operation and production processes, especially in the refineries, and then the medical wastes
نشاط الصحة والمهنية في الشركات النفطية ومن
that result from the health centers in the oil companies. Next, please. There are other wastes that are associated with the oil wastes that we used, and these are the scrap metal wastes, and hopefully they would be examined by the radioactivity center to ensure that they are free of any radioactivity. We have old furniture waste also, and there's plenty of them. Electronic wastes. These are computers, telephones, printers, and photocopiers and inks. These are all in huge amounts, and different batteries, consumed batteries. And then we have consumed wheels and damaged electric appliances. Next, please. In my presentation here, we tackle the types of wastes and how to manage these wastes, and the chemicals and the problems and barriers associated with these wastes, in addition to the committees which we share with the Ministry of Health and Environment and other line ministries that share the national policy for chemical and waste management. As you know, there is a huge amount of laboratory and operational chemicals that are used across all the production processes, such as the enhancers, the anti-corrosives, the reagents, viscosity boosters, polymers, and our ministry is attempting to manage the risks of these wastes to safeguard the workers and the environment in coordination with the Ministry of Health and Environment. And thus, several procedures have been put in place to manage these wastes. And these procedures or these measures, they would not prevent the risk 100%, but they would reduce or mitigate the risks at least. So some of these measures that our ministry have undertaken are as follows. Next, please. A central committee for observing and controlling the storage and the handling of hazardous chemicals, and it has representatives of all the oil production companies and the training institutes and the Ministry of Health and Environment. And the goal of this committee, one of them is to conduct a comprehensive survey of the storages of chemical storages in the oil fields and locations and sites. Also to abide by world and international quality standards and the application of the highest levels of quality in HSE. And one of the significant mandates of this committee, these are some of the most significant tasks in this committee to manage chemical and hazardous waste in the oil sector. Next, please. As we said, this committee has members of all the oil companies, and one of their duties is to conduct field visits to the oil company sites. So, for example, if you want to visit the Basra storage or oil storages, so there would be a team from the different companies in Basra to identify the strengths and negatives and the strengths and weaknesses in storing the chemicals and wastes here, and these should be monitored and followed up during the next visit. And the most important thing is the updating of the database of the facilities that are subject to inspection and visit, and checking whether these storage meet the requirements, or do they lack safety and security standards. And so the database would be updated, and our ministry takes great interest in the database. And the chemical department, the study and the technical departments also in our ministry, and we have committees also with the Ministry of Health and Environment. So in coordination with the representatives of our oil companies, such as the health and environment divisions, and all these stakeholders in the oil companies, we are in collaboration and coordination for the waste management. And I would love to say that we have a department for the waste management in our ministry. And after the update of this database, it would be documented in our ministry and in the technical department. Also, they set measures for storing the chemical and the dual-use chemical material. Next, please. One of the mandates also of this committee is to conduct training and workshops, and to qualify human resources able to handle hazardous materials, whether to store them or to handle them or to treat them, in addition to the workshops in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Environment in conducting workshops such as this one that we are attending, and hopefully it would be useful for everyone. And constructing model storages for chemicals according to international standards in terms of the feeding and the ventilation, and the how to apply the MSDS to all of the material, and in addition to the safety requirements and the early warning system, the firefighting system, and these would all be considered when constructing these storages, because these storages contain flammable material and corrosive materials, so safety and firefighting standards must be highly observed. Next, please. This form is not very clear in the presentation. This is one type of this is a form that is being used by those who conduct field visits. The date of the visit, the points that should be observed, and the status quo. And I'm sorry, it's not legible. So this is just a form. Maybe our colleagues in the chemical material handling are more aware of. One of the significant tasks also as part of the mandate of the Chemical Management Department is the participation in the Supreme National Committee to manage chemicals policy in Iraq, and it has as its members representatives from all the ministries and Ministry of National Security, Ministry of Trade and Technology. We have also got the approval of the oil sector leadership to form a central ministerial committee to assess the chemical use in the permitting rounds and for the companies that we have contracted, and hopefully their storages are somehow better and they are different from the national oil companies, and these should identify the expired and the damaged and the unnecessary chemicals and how to treat them, and to maybe impose fines in case in case of inaction regarding these materials. And this is one of the actions that our ministry have undertaken to follow with the permit measures, because they use large amounts of the chemicals. Next, please. Also, these points also highlight the Ministry of Oil coordination with the line ministries, each according to their mandate. We have created an electronic control program or software for the operational material and their storage and order situations, their storage locations, and whether such materials are surplus or damaged or expired. And also we do coordinate with the Ministry of Science and Technology in order because there are some materials that are banned from handling, and the Ministry of Science and Technology, they have to clarify who is going to use this material, and even if they go bad in the storage, they have to inform the Ministry of Oil of such material because of the hazard of such materials, so that they don't fall into the wrong hands. Next, please.
Lost Chidima and your presentation as a result. So let's just give her a few minutes. I will also try and retrieve your presentation.
إيه، اوكي طلع لها صوت يعني؟
Sorry about that. We're just
Hey.
going to give her a few minutes to Okay. I think I have your presentation, so I can actually show it. I just want to make sure that it's the correct one. Yes. Okay.
نعم. Yes.
Hold on. I have your presentation. Hang on. Okay. Do you see my slide now? Can I just get a confirmation?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I see that. Yes.
Okay, I will go. Let me just pass. I think you were you here? Were you in
I
slide
think the
12?
previous slide.
Previous
Not
slide.
this.
Okay. Yeah,
Yes,
this
Yes,
one.
yes, exactly.
Okay. Please continue. I will pass your slide.
شكرا. وصلنا إلى موضوع المواد.
So we were talking about the dual use chemicals and substances, and in coordination with the Ministry of Science and Technology, we would update them on these material because they can be used wrongfully. They can be used in terrorism, and so these should be highly controlled by the Ministry of Science and Technology. Also, we coordinate with the Ministry of Trade regarding the mechanisms for licensing of chemical importation, as well as coordination with the Ministry of Health and Environment regarding the chemicals used in the oil sector, or for the study or for the ESIAs of these material. Next. As you know, the oil companies have emergency plans, and these emergency plans include several aspects. They have to emergency firefighting plan, emergency flood and flash floods plan, and another emergency plan for oil spills. So the emergency plans, in order to be comprehensive for all the accidents that, God forbid, might result from terror activities. So there should be an emergency plan for chemicals. And so a committee headed by our ministry with representatives from all the oil companies in order to decided to have to unify three emergency plans into one plan, and to identify roles and responsibilities with telephone numbers for those in charge. And this emergency plan is updated occasionally, and we are doing this so that in case of an oil spill, regarding maybe because of bad use or because of any terror attack, so these chemicals would not be leaked to the surrounding environment. And through this emergency plan, we would take all the necessary measures to prevent the leakage of such chemicals. And we are currently conducting this plan, and it would be soon achieved, and this would be informed to the Ministry of Health and Environment and the Ministry of Science and Technology, because they were required to continue to form this committee for the chemical security. Next, please.
We're reaching 10:30. So if you can wrap up in about 10 minutes or so, that would be great. And we can have a
Yes.
good discussion. Okay. And if you can focus on some of the challenges, and then we will, of course, share your slides. Thank you.
نعم. هاي الترالي. هاي السياسة العامة الوطنية
This is the national policy for the chemical management, and this is in coordination with our ministry, with the Ministry of Science and Technology, the National Security, the regulation team. These are 6 or 7 committees that our ministry is involved with in a way of managing the chemical policy in the oil and gas sector. Next, please. Another very important topic, which is the oil spills. And as you all know, this is the most risky thing that the Ministry of Oil has to encounter, because of compromises the infrastructure, it needs huge financial allocations, and maybe this have to do with the bad maintenance, and this would result in huge environmental harms, and this might be aggravated by rainfall, and this might cause a leakage and into the close by lands and agricultural lands. And so that's why we conducted a study in the Ministry of Oil. And in brief, this is a huge study, and it has recommendations and constraints. And so we set specific recommendations, and the best scenario for these oil waste is to sell them, invest in them, and reuse them or repurpose them, maybe through a biological biotreatment or thermal treatment, and depending on the type of company that's coming to treat these waste. Next, please. The emergency oil contaminant ponds, and these have resulted as a result of tank accidents or maintenance accidents, and these oil substances should be withdrawn and or draw them, and because these might compromise the oil inventory, and this should be, or oil reservoirs, and this should be drawn and treated. Next, please. We said that after these oil contaminants are drawn, these ponds, and this means the contaminated soils, and contracts have been concluded with the Ministry of Science and Technology to treat some of the ponds. And this is the Russian oil company that has been treated by the FSK and that has been examined by the Ministry of Health and Environment. And also there is the waste in the Bin Omar River, and this is a model of how oil fluids and oil liquids are treated. Next, please. Irregular production ponds, and this is the evaporation ponds resulting from water associated with the crude oil production or wash water. And as we have said, these require huge amounts of money and allocations, and in case these treatment units are absent, so we have to have irregular pits with high density polyethylene in order to, after ensuring the specifications have met, and the water should be treated in order to be re-injected in the oil wells in order to raise the reservoir pressure. Next, please. The drilling muds, these should be collected in regular pits lined by a high-density polyethylene. And for these, as per the instructions of the Ministry of Health and Environment, these ponds should be regular and lined. And these require stricter measures. The hazardous waste that the Ministry of Environment allowed us to contract with specialist companies in oil and drum waste management companies, and they provided us with these companies. Also, electrical and electronic wastes, they are collected currently in the oil company storages, and there is no suggested method to safely dispose of them, and they are a burden to these storage. So if there is a sound method to dispose of these waste, this would be much better. Next, please. For empty chemical drums, these are one of the problems, and they amount to about tens of thousands, especially in the extraction companies, and so these should be treated or damaged by the Ministry of Science and Technology, as we have said. The scrap metal, they are auctioned after it's radioactively examined by the Radioactive Prevention Center, and consumed batteries are delivered to the Ministry of Industry, and the metals to the public company for automotives, and the battery factory for replacement. Next, please. Consumed wheels also are delivered to the Ministry of Industry and Metals, and for the medical waste, we each oil company has a contract with the ministry, with the nearest hospital, to deliver medical waste to them. Next, please.
5 minutes to just wrap up, and then we'll come back to your presentation with a Q&A. Okay?
I think that's enough. Okay. Okay. 10 minutes.
Okay. We have discarded the use of the TEL ever since 2014, because of the construction of the modern refineries and the creation of the petrol enhancement units. And we have and the TEL is handled by the Annex 3 of the Rotterdam, and it's banned. So through this company, through this committee that was formed, we have arrived at TEL replacements such as
استخدام أحد
BE and ETBE. Yes, please. Also, the naturally occurring radioactive material, or norms, that Mr. Mike has mentioned. These norms are resulting from the crude oil production, and they contain radium and radon, and these are radioactive materials that need special separators to isolate oil and gas, and there's also solid wastes, and there is scales on the pipelines, and they might be highly radioactive, more highly radioactive than allowed. And this would be depending on the type of field and the reservoir layer. But as it is said, most of the reservoir layers containing norms are in Rumaila oil field in Basra. Next, please. Several measures are in place by our oil companies for prevention against radioactivity resulting from these material. And after this isolator, they are collected in the South Rumaila site, and this is not a treatment. This is just a temporary solution until the competent authority conducts its research and finds the solution. Next, please. Also, they do the radioactive measures for the resulting wastes of the maintenance and cleanups after isolation, and we also do coordination with the Ministry of Health and Environment regarding these measures and providing it with all these readings. Next, please. The problems, this is a very important point, the problems related or the results of these paper, we have several chemical management, and the treatment is a burden to the oil companies or the oil industry. So we have an internal problem, and we want to just to show them, which is the coordination with the Ministry of Technology and Trade, and the law stipulates that there should be the examination of the projects according to the law of 2015. Also, another problem is the stockpiling of huge amounts of chemical surpluses and damaged chemicals in these companies. Next, please. The high cost of the treatment and damaging of hazardous material, the risky transportation of hazardous material inter-governorates, and the stockpiling of huge amounts of electronic and electrical wastes in the storages of oil companies, and the lack of environmental approvals for the chemical storages, because most of the oil facilities are old and not environmentally approved. Next, please. And as well as also as a result of the urban sprawl, the residential areas are close to the oil companies. Another thing is the Ministry of Science and Technology and loitering in treating the radioactive wastes to remove the radioactive pollution in the norms. And the final thing is the huge spills of oil ponds resulting from the active daily activities of the oil production. Next, please. Our recommendations that the workshop have concluded is that oil companies should have a drum treatment systems according to the instructions of the Ministry of Health and Environment, and coordination with a specialist company approved by the Ministry of the Health and Environment. Second is the Ministry of Health and Environment should indicate to the expert team in the Information Bank Committee to issue the necessary approvals for damaged chemicals and those listed in the Information Bank. Next, please. Ministry of Health and Environment should examine the proposals and we think that they are the ones who can some NGOs can take such wastes, and we encourage the Ministry of Environment to find a solution to this problem, because we are providing them with the information on damaged electric devices. Obligating oil companies to get the or obtain the necessary environmental approvals, and also they should also abide by the law of maintaining the hydrocarbon wealth of 2009. Thank you. I'm sorry for being too long.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was a really
شكرا جزيلا لك. كانت هذه نظرة عامة سريعة.
on the English channel. Thank you. So, are there any clarification questions from the floor for Mr. Aziz? Are there any other questions? I do have some follow-up questions, Mr. Aziz, if possible. You mentioned, I think this central committee that you have established is quite important because it's an inter-ministerial committee, it sounds like, to try to have a full oversight of the issues related to waste in Iraq. So, but I just had a question. You said you conducted a survey of all the wastes being stored, and you have a database. So, can you just please clarify to us? When you did the survey of waste, is this published, or how did you classify the waste streams in the country, the hazardous wastes in the country when you did the survey? What classification method or system did you use? And then if you can please clarify on the database of facilities that you have, like what is this database and what does it contain? Just to have an idea of what systems you have in place. And then I will ask also Mike to come on screen to also give his thoughts. So can I have the response to those two questions first?
نعم. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you. As for the committee, it is a private, it is a committee only working in the oil field, and it supervises the storage, the transportation of the oil, and we said that they go and they do a survey, and according to the Basel Agreement, these material have been classified as hazardous and non-hazardous. The database, the petroleum, the Ministry of Petroleum, the visiting delegate would report to the ministry, and the database, as we have Mr. Ali, he is from the technical department for chemical materials. I think he can answer the other part of the question. May peace be upon you. As for the database, actually, there are two committees in the ministry. One is for research and responsible for the hazardous and the double usage material, and there is another committee, a central committee that is responsible for all the chemical material, whether they are research or lab chemicals or excess chemicals or double usage chemicals. So in general, anything related to chemical material, starting from the ordering phase until its storage, in addition to providing us with regular monthly reports of where they are stored and the nature of storage and the storage houses, and if they are not functional. So all this is under the petroleum sector. Mike, هل تريد can I add some point please?
إسراء منقذ نقطة ارتباط اتفاقية
Isra Mon, the responsible person for the Basel treatment. As for the hazardous chemicals, we have committees and hazardous materials. We do a survey or all the information that we get is not real time or real figures. They're not accurate. The Ministry of Petroleum follow up with us all the time, and most of their data is very accurate and very actual. And we include all this into the annual report and into the report of the Basel Agreement and the national report. The problem is the amount of chemicals. As we know, the Basel Agreement, there is a hazardous chemicals or wastes, MNY 47. And this is the first attachment. It could be included as an amount, but the classification is not there because in the agreement from Y1 to Y45, and we do the meetings annual, we have the amounts, but not as a classification of oil wastes, because the agreement states the that all the details or the specifications should be there, not only the wise. So we have to produce a report, but we don't have the information. As for the data banks or the information committees, we requested the ministries to use these, not to use the chemical hazardous wastes or the destroyed chemical wastes, and we are waiting for the response from the ministries not to use the chemical materials that are wasted. And so this is the future. As for the electronic and electric wastes, we have a strategy, and from this the problem is the governmental support so that we can apply these policies or the strategy on the ground, because we have short-term plans, the long-term plans, maybe the short plans. I can have storage places for the waste and everything. So we have a lot of things that are included in the Basel Agreement, but the delay is because of the scarcity of cadres and resources.
Okay. Thank you for adding that. I will ask Mike and then some of our team members to also comment on the presentation. Mike, could you go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Marisol. Can you just confirm you hear me okay?
I do hear you and see you.
Jolly good. Okay. Let me start by saying thank you to our colleague for that excellent presentation, full of very relevant information. And I would just like to ask a couple of questions for my understanding for clarification. Firstly, I understand that a lot of the waste that we're talking about is historical waste, legacy waste. And just from my understanding, I'm wondering how we have arrived at that situation. Is it that the oil companies that generated the waste are no longer operational, that they've left and leaving their waste behind? Or are the oil companies actually still present and still operating, but that they've generated a large stockpile of waste that they're still containing, still managing? I'd be interested to know if those oil companies are still operational and still on the ground.
Good question. Mr. Aziz and other colleagues from the Ministry of
نعم.
Petroleum, if you want to answer that.
انا راح يعني ان شاء الله راح ما يقول انطي في الجواب.
I will give you the answer, and if any of our colleagues want to add anything. My answer is, as he said, that the wastes are divided into two parts. The old waste, like Rumaila or the Zubair, those were before the 2003 incidents. And there was the economic blockade and the infrastructure that was destroyed. It was very difficult to have any kind of processing of the waste. The new registrations that were signed by Iraq after 2009 for new oil fields, brown fields, there has to be a plan for control of in the preliminary plan, and which will be monitored by the ministry and the environmental organization. So the problem is issuing the licenses. We have discussed this with the oil companies, and they said that they will add it as a supplemental costs or additional costs. So these IOC companies will have some funds to manage these wastes. But so far, we are working on a program to deal with the old wastes. As I said before in the presentation, that they could be lined. We have problems in the unorganized wastes, the historical wastes that were done without licenses. I lost the sound. As the database that we have, there are a lot of chemical materials that go back to tens of years, especially in the oil for food. I have chemicals that we don't know the validity or goes back to the 60s of the last century, so they are very, very old. These are some of the materials that we asked the Ministry of Health and Environment to tell us the answer to start and get rid of it. I lost the sound again. Yeah. Now I can hear you, but I cannot hear the I'm not sure. Can you hear them? Yeah, I can hear you, but I can't hear the floor. Yeah. Maybe it's a technical problem. Yeah, I think they did. Yeah, it went all black all of a sudden, and I lost the sound for seconds, and then they came back. Uh, I'm I can hear you, but I don't know if they can hear me. Let me check if they can hear me. I'm using floor, but I cannot hear the floor as well. I'm the interpreter, and I cannot hear the floor.
You can hear us, Mr. Youssef?
Oh, I can hear Marisol again now.
Yeah, there was a bit of I couldn't hear you as well, Mike.
Okay, we're back together.
Can I just
نعم.
confirmation from the
نسمعكم
floor that
نعم
you can
جيدا.
hear us? Yes?
نعم نسمعكم جيدا.
I think we can hear you again. Okay.
Now I can hear them as well. Okay, perfect. Yeah.
So I think Mike's point, I think, regarding roles and responsibilities is that I think that's why Mike asked the question, are the operators still existing right now, the ones who produce the legacy waste issues, and whether they are existing right now for the current waste issues? Because I think what he was trying to drive home is that it is the responsibility and problem of the operator to manage the waste, okay, and not the responsibility of the government. And so, we understand that these are now legacy. There are legacy waste issues in Iraq, but really, there should be some understanding from the operator side that it is their responsibility to take care of the waste from what Mike would say cradle to grave, from the beginning until the end, and its disposal. So it's not the government's responsibility to oversee that, and it should be something that the operator is responsible for. Is there anything else you wanted to drive home, Mike, in terms of what we saw in terms of the presentation?
Yeah, and again, just for my
عفواً
understanding, just
بالتعقيب
for
يعني.
my information, our colleague Mr. Aziz was mentioning that there's a Russian company who are, I think I understood, doing some waste management activities in what was described, I think, as a sort of a model fashion. I wonder if Mr. Aziz or his colleagues could just explain
عفواً
what activities
بالتعليق
this Russian
التفويض.
company are involved in specifically. I'd be interested in what they're treating simplistically and how they're treating. Are they incinerating? Are they using thermal desorption or other technologies? I would be interested in what they're doing.
I would like to clarify one point that treating the oil wastes after the licenses and the new wells, the standard contract between the IOC and the operator. I think there is a power outage. So the agreement, according to the law, that the operator would treat the wastes that are an outcome of the operations, whereas to the historical wastages that needs to have some funds because they are old and they need a lot of funding, and it's supplementary costs. As for treating the Russian company, it is not only the Russian company. They worked in a field, in a new field, unlike the other wells or the oil fields. We visited this several times. There are treatment of wastes, separation, and they have lined storage or tanks. There is a treatment that is better than other companies that have dealt with the fields that had old production.
To pursue that point, could I ask what treatment technologies they are using? We've heard about, okay, they're using lined tanks and separation of waste, but I'm interested in how they're actually disposing of the waste. What technology are they employing?
Can we have can we get something from the floor on the specific treatment technologies
Can you
being
hear me?
used by your Russian operator? Go ahead, Mr. Aziz.
ممكن إعادة السؤال أو التعليق لأنه انقطع الصوت.
Can you repeat the question, because there was a technical problem, he couldn't hear it.
To the company, the Russian company that was mentioned, and I'm just interested in what sort of waste disposal technology they're using. For example, are they using incineration or thermal desorption or engineered landfill sites? I'd just be interested in what technology they're actually using.
أغلبها تكنولوجيا معالجة بيولوجية.
It's mostly biological treatment. Yeah.
We will come back to this discussion actually tomorrow to discuss the various treatment options and the advantages and disadvantages of each. So we will come back to that. Okay. So if there are no further questions per se from the floor, I think we will have a richer discussion once we have input from our Basel Convention colleague. So let me now turn to Yvonne. Thank you very much, Mike and Mr. Aziz, for your presentations thus far. I give you both a round of applause. Now may I ask Yvonne, I think you're online, and you can then share your screen to present your slide.
Thank you very much, Marisol, and thank you for giving me the chance to give the presentation. Hopefully, I can give everybody a little bit more information before you break off for lunch. And a lot of what I'll say will tie in quite neatly with the presentation we just heard from Mr. Aziz, as well as the points that Mike made earlier on. So without further ado, let me share my screen for you and pull up the presentation. So please tell me you can.
Yes, I can see your screen, albeit. Yep. Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. All right. Thank you. And again, if I do speak too quickly for the interpreters, please do let me know as well. So the intention is, I think from hearing the interactions this morning, a lot of you already have quite a firm basis on the provisions of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, and some of you are actually the designated contacts. So for some of the slides, I will go a little faster than for others. Just to give you an overview as to where we stand, these are very long-standing conventions, right from 1989 with the Basel Convention through to 2001 with the Stockholm Convention. We were referring earlier on to a cradle-to-grave approach, and very much these conventions work hand in hand so as to try and ensure that kind of approach. And the key thing being that they are pretty much universal coverage. So, for example, Basel being 188 parties throughout the world, which is, I think, just under 10 countries short of having universal coverage. And in terms of where Iraq stands, Iraq has been a party to these conventions for quite a few number of years. It became a party to the Basel Convention in 2011, Rotterdam Convention in 2017, and Stockholm in 2016. So there is already a very well-established relationship with your government and with your country. As mentioned, we work together within the umbrella of these three conventions to cover cradle-to-grave approach, and in that way to protect human health and the environment against these hazardous chemicals and wastes. There is a commonality in terms of what's covered under the conventions. Those of you who have already been working to a certain extent with the conventions will have seen that, for example, most of the chemicals under Stockholm, the persistent organic pollutants or POPs, are covered by all three of the conventions. The Rotterdam Convention covers chemicals that are pesticides as well as industrial chemicals. In this presentation, we'll be looking more at the industrial chemicals, but if ever you were to come across the pesticides in your work, then you might be interested in knowing that those are also within the scope of the three conventions. And of course, as wastes, you have the Basel Convention that catches everything. So what do they cover? And this goes to the heart of the problems that, or the challenges that you were talking about earlier on. Basel covers both hazardous wastes and other wastes. What we will be looking at a little bit towards the end of this presentation, but probably more within the presentation you'll hear tomorrow, is the issue of classification, which is always the challenge. And I believe we heard from the focal point of the Basel Convention just earlier on this morning about the challenges with classification of the hazardous wastes, particularly if you receive information that's not using the Y codes within the Annex 1 of the Basel Convention. As mentioned, the Rotterdam Convention covers these two categories of chemicals, so pesticides and industrial chemicals. And we did hear earlier on of some of those chemicals that are covered under the Rotterdam Convention that are also banned for use within Iraq. So that is something we can look at as well as we go forwards to see how to strengthen the implementation of the Rotterdam Convention on the ground. And of course, you have these persistent organic pollutants, which are highly hazardous chemicals with certain characteristics that are covered under the Stockholm Convention. What does Basel aim to do? Within the context of Basel, the aim is to try and minimize how much hazardous waste you generate, not only in terms of the quantities, the tonnage, but also in terms of how hazardous that waste is, to promote the environmentally sound management of the wastes, and to control transboundary movements. Ideally, you would have a system, a procedure in place that would allow for a smooth management of those wastes from the point where they're generated within the oil fields, through to any transportation, and that could involve transportation within the boundaries of Iraq, but that would not fall under the Basel Convention. But if you were going to send it abroad, for example, then you would need to look at what conditions need to be fulfilled, and this prior informed consent procedure, or PIC procedure. So looking at controlling those movements so that you have adequate information, and that helps in the event of preventing any illegal traffic of wastes, in the event of ensuring that action can be taken to avoid any accidents or to address any accidents if they do happen. It's very important to note that when the Basel Convention picks up this issue of transboundary movement and environmentally sound management of wastes, we do refer to transboundary movement only among parties. So among the 188 parties that have agreed to the obligations under the convention, you can have separate agreements or arrangements with non-parties. So, for example, the United States is a non-party, and with those non-parties, you can put in place agreements or arrangements that provide the same conditions, not less environmentally sound than the convention itself. The key is this prior informed consent procedure. And you were referring earlier on to the MSDS sheets, which are a key element of the management of these chemicals and wastes. Under Basel, two other key documents for you would be the notification document and the movement document. And those documents should accompany every shipment from the point of departure. So that would be, for example, from the storage tanks within the oil fields to the point where it will be disposed. If there is an import ban, or if a country is not given its consent to import those wastes, then that export should be prohibited. So if you had, for example, an export from a different country to Iraq of waste chemicals that had been banned, then with the notification of that information to the Secretariat, that movement should not even begin. There is a definition, and this is quite a specificity of the Basel Convention. It does define what is illegal traffic. So that includes, for example, a movement that is without consent, a movement where the documents don't correspond with what you have in front of you, a movement where you have fraud or misrepresentation or false documents that then led to the consent, or if it's going to result in dumping, in deliberate disposal that is not as set out in the convention. And there are consequences provided in the convention itself. One point that that Mike has stressed earlier on in his presentations, and that is also key to help you in going forwards, is what is contained in the national legislation of Iraq. Iraq has sent quite a lot of information to the Secretariat, and we do have, for example, texts of specific national legislation and regulations that are on the website, and that can give you further information about exactly what conditions have been put in place. But of course, it is key to have those measures adopted at the national level to give you the mandate to provide for the consequences of illegal traffic, to ensure that you can follow the prior informed consent procedure to ensure that there is this responsibility on the producers, on the generators of these wastes, so that there is really a mandate, a backing for you as you try to implement the convention. So maybe just to run through very quickly, what are the 4 key stages of the prior informed consent procedure? Firstly, you have notification, and that would include a contract being agreed between a generator, so that would be in giving the example of oil and gas production, it could be the operator of the oil field and a disposer, and they would conclude a contract that would specify exactly how those wastes would be disposed of. So it could be, for example, incineration. It could be some other treatment. So that would need to be set out in that contract, which is then shared with the competent authority of Iraq, if Iraq is the country of export. And there's a first step where there's a communication between the generator and the country of export, and the country of export decides whether to allow that movement or not. If it does decide that that is a movement that meets with the conditions under the convention, it sends the notification document, and you'll recall a minute ago I spoke of the notification and the movement documents, which are key for the PIC procedure, and those are sent to countries of transit and the country of import. Those countries then decide whether to agree or deny permission for the movement to take place. And they, through their competent authorities, inform the country of export. And if there is consent, and that can be consent with or without conditions, if there is consent, then the country of export will issue the movement document, which is to follow the shipment from the point of its generation to the point of its disposal. Once there's been consent and the movement document has been issued, the movement can then begin. Once the movement has taken place, the disposer, so the facility, whoever's treating it, will need to be sure that they send a copy of the signed movement document. So the movement document, when it's received with the shipment at the place of final disposal, it will be signed by whoever takes that shipment, and then that is sent to the country of export, to their competent authority. If that document is not received, there can be a follow-up between the different competent authorities. So, for example, the country of export can get in contact with the country of import to be sure that the disposal has taken place as it should have done. And then, as the final step, there is this confirmation that the disposal has taken place. And there again, if there is no communication received, it may well be that the competent authority wants to follow up in order to confirm completion of the disposal in this way to protect human health and the environment. And there are these different categories, going back to the issue of classification. And as again, we will certainly look into this in a lot more detail, and I'm sure you'll have many questions. So we have, for example, these 45 categories in Annex 1 that are classed as hazardous wastes. And they are further clarified by what is in Annex 8, which are presumed hazardous unless you use certain characteristics to show that they're not, as well as Annex 9, which are normally non-hazardous wastes. And so they wouldn't, the Annex 9 wastes wouldn't require the PIC procedure. To give an example of classification of waste oils, one of the examples in a fact sheet that was produced by an expert working group under the Basel Convention stated that waste oils can belong in category Y8. And there are further classifications that could be relevant. So, for example, A3020 in Annex 8, which would be, again, a hazardous waste. The issue we were talking about earlier on this morning of the analyses, the record keeping, that will be an absolutely essential tool to help you determine what you have in front of you as a waste under Basel, and whether Basel applies or not. So it would certainly be good to look at what links you have between those analyses and the Basel procedures and the measures to implement the Basel procedures. Here you will receive this presentation, so please just look at this as an example. It is not comprehensive. There are many documents to help you determine what you have in front of you. But this is an example of potential categories of waste that could be controlled. And you see there, we spoke about this morning, I heard that batteries are potentially a problem. We have here waste tires as well, lithium batteries that could be within some of the electronic and electrical equipment. So there are a variety of different Y codes that could be involved with each shipment. And then, of course, you have the disposal operations. There are two different categories: the final disposal operations, which are in Annex 4 and the Part A, and then you also have the what are commonly referred to as the recycling, the reuse operations. And there you'll see, as an example, we've just highlighted the R9 operation, which refers to used oil re-refining and other reuses of previously used oil. So that could be something that is relevant for you to consider if you are either receiving or sending out these waste oils. And of course, it's looking at what are Iraq's obligations under the convention. There is this emphasis on ESM, environmentally sound management of the wastes, looking at minimizing how much is moved across borders, and trying to treat those wastes as close as possible to the place of their generation, and minimize how much waste is generated at source. So there, for example, looking at what are the facilities that Iraq has within its own borders, and if those are not appropriate for the ESM of the wastes, where is the closest facility that can deal with that? There is a table within the national reports for facilities that can deal with different types of wastes. So within, for example, the Iraqi 2019 national report, there is some information on facilities within there. But you could also consult the national reports of other countries within the region to see where, if there are no facilities within the Iraqi territory, where could be the closest place to dispose of those wastes. I'll turn to the Rotterdam Convention now, which focuses very much on information exchange, shared responsibility, and cooperation. It's going a bit further up the life cycle, so it's looking at trade of chemicals, and this would be before they become wastes. So the Rotterdam Convention does not cover wastes, but should work hand in hand with the Basel Convention to ensure this life cycle approach. There is a listing in Annex 3, but it also covers exports of chemicals that have been banned or severely restricted and that are then exported from that party to another party. There are these three key elements of final regulatory action notifications, import responses, and export notifications, which we'll look at now. We do have for each of the chemicals a decision guidance document, which is available on the website as well. And that gives you information about all of the chemicals that are listed in Annex 3. It gives you information on their chemical identity. It gives you information on their uses. It gives you information on trade names, for example. And that could be quite helpful if you have an issue of, for example, different trade names being used in different countries. The DGD could help you to identify what you have in front of you. The DGD, the decision guidance document, also helps to provide a response about whether or not you wish to consent to import of that chemical. And you can find information about Iraq's import responses on the website. There is a country profile with all of this information there, and there is an obligation to ensure that that import response is complied with by entities within the national jurisdiction. So the committee, for example, that we were referring to earlier on, could be a mechanism to share that information with the operators in your territory. Turning very briefly to the Stockholm Convention and looking at the characteristics of what are POPs, I think a lot of you would be familiar in any event with the fact that they are highly persistent, they are bioaccumulative, and so these are a very specific set of chemicals that, again, uses a listing approach. So you have these three annexes. Within Annex A, you have the most hazardous chemicals that are scheduled for elimination as soon as possible. Within Annex B, those are still hazardous chemicals, but looking towards restriction or limitation. And then Annex C covers unintentional releases from unintentional production. So the aim really to give as holistic a protection as possible for both humans and the environment from these particularly hazardous chemicals. There are specific trade controls for the most hazardous chemicals. So looking at only importing or exporting in certain circumstances where you have a permitted use, for example, through an exemption that's been registered, or for environmentally sound disposal. So here it's also important to identify what you have in front of you and to see whether it falls under the categories that you have in the annexes A and B. And there are various actions that are to be taken to try and either prevent or reduce releases from unintentional production that are listed in Article 5 as well as Annex C. And there should be a plan as well when it comes to fulfilling the obligations of the convention in that respect. So looking at inventories, looking at the action plans, looking at having a dynamic process that is regularly reviewed. And then there is a very close link between the Basel Convention and the Stockholm Convention in that stockpiles and wastes of POPs chemicals are controlled under the Stockholm Convention, but there is a link with and communication between the different bodies of these two conventions. So we have, for example, technical guidelines developed under the Basel Convention that link with listing of additional chemicals under the Stockholm Convention. So the conventions work very much hand in hand, which can also help you when it comes to record keeping, to sharing information, because you may find that in certain circumstances the same information that you use for reporting under Basel could help you with reporting under Stockholm, for example. So that's something to also bear in mind as you go forwards. So turning specifically to the oil and gas sector, there are various different kinds of obligations. The main one, of course, being the waste management obligations, and we've spoken in quite a lot of detail about that. We do also have a presentation for you with specific guidance and an introduction to what documents are available. I gave an example earlier on of the fact sheet on waste oils. There are also fact sheets on electronic and electrical waste that could be relevant. There are also documents on tires, looking at some of the waste streams that were mentioned this morning. We do have guidance for you on issues of classification and inventories of hazardous wastes, as well as on national reporting. And then there are guidance documents to help with identifying best available techniques and best environmental practices, or BEP. We do have under development guidance on contaminated sites, but that is still in draft form at the present time. So for contaminated sites, that would be coming in the near future, but it's still being worked on. The legal and institutional frameworks are absolutely essential. I mentioned a little bit earlier that to address several of the points that Mike brought up earlier on, in terms of ensuring that you can follow up with the operators, you can have a mandate to collect information, to enforce the measures that Iraq has adopted. In order to do that, you would need to have a robust legal and institutional framework in place that also includes some elements of cooperation and coordination, not only between ministries, but with also other stakeholders. And the excellent news is, it sounds as though there is already very significant progress within Iraq towards such frameworks and mechanisms, with committees being set up, with communication between the different ministries. So that is an important element to support you in your work. And of course, in having those communications, those exchanges, that information collection, it helps you to identify where there is a need for further technical assistance. And you have an excellent resource with the series of training and activities that are being undertaken by colleagues in UNEP at the moment. The Secretariat stands ready to further support you as well, whether it's technical assistance activities or sitting with, for example, a focal point or an official contact point to fill in a national report. There are various different ways to do that. We do also offer, for example, if there are questions that come up, to send us an email saying, I have a shipment going through, I'm not sure which documents I need, I'm not sure how to identify what I have in front of us, and we will certainly do all we can to support you in those efforts as well. So I'll stop there because I am very conscious of the time that we have, and I will take any questions that you might have at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. That was really very clear and succinct. So I'm sure colleagues would appreciate it. I will turn now to Bella to facilitate the questions and answer segment. So please feel free to ask your questions to Yvonne while we have her today. Thanks.
Yeah, so hello all. If you have any questions, go ahead and let us know.
نعم أحمد عباس فاضل شركة المشروع.
Yes, Ahmed Abbas Fadl from the Oil Projects Company. In our work, we have to use the radioactive sources for the examination purposes. So are these radioactive sources covered by the Basel Convention? And do we have to return it to the manufacturing country? Is this allowed by the Basel Convention if it covers the radioactive material?
Bella, if I may dive straight in.
Yes, go ahead.
Great, thank you. So thank you very much, Mr. Ahmed, for your question. And I should have specified as we went through the Basel Convention provisions that the Basel Convention does actually exclude radioactive waste. So radioactive waste, we work very closely with the IAEA in Vienna, and we can certainly put you in contact with relevant colleagues there. But radioactive waste would not fall under the scope of the Basel Convention. In terms of the issue of whether these could be returned to a producer, there may be something either within the contract you have, and I'm not sure if Mike is on board, and maybe he has further information about this. But there may be something equivalent to, for example, extended producer responsibility or some other obligation with the supply of those radioactive materials that then requires that they be taken back. There could also be something within the Iraqi legislation that requires that those radioactive wastes be dealt with in a specific way, but that would all fall outside of the scope of the Basel Convention.
That was an excellent question. Are there any more from the group?
نعم يعني عندي سؤالين.
Yes, I have two questions actually in terms of the Basel Convention. Because we follow up the implementation of the convention in the Ministry of Health and Environment, we had some difficulties regarding the accession, and it had to do specifically with the exportation of hazardous wastes from Iraq, and it had to do with the Block Oil company which operates in Basra. So we had to export their wastes via Basra port, but what happened is that many countries responded poorly or did not respond to the written notifications that we sent to them. We tried to several times to send this notification letter, but these countries did not respond. According to the Basel Convention, within 60 days, if these countries do not respond, this should not be. This should have happened. I mean, the exportation, and that's why we hesitated in exporting the hazardous wastes from Iraq. This is the first problem. So, what are the measures that we can take as a convention ratifying country to dispose of these materials, and how the BRS Secretariat can help us in case we receive no response to the written notification. This is my first question. The second question is that we legislated this restriction decision, and as we know that countries have national legislation that have to do with the restriction decision, and we considered it a national decree, and so this is one of the convention obligation. What is the result of this? We know that this is an international protection for any country from the irresponsible disposal of waste. So the question is, would this restriction decree prevent me from importing this hazardous waste, or is it just about the illegitimate trade in hazardous wastes and the like? Thank you.
Sorry, I was just
أعتذر لقد كنت أكتب. Sorry, I'm on the English.
Sorry. Thank you. We had some very, very good questions there, and I was just writing down so that I could make sure that I respond to all of the different points that that were raised. In terms of the challenges you've been facing with getting a response when you send out the notification, I would say there are various different channels that you can follow in to help you there. The first one would be that if you send out a response and or a notification, and you're waiting for a response and you have difficulties with communicating with the parties, please feel free to send us an email. And we will follow up to see if there is any challenge with, for example, the contact details, to see if there's any further information needed. We're here to help as well when it comes to making sure that communication between parties is fluid. So we're more than happy to help you with following up with that. The other element that might help you in terms of the follow up in the event of no response is that it is of note that there is a proposal for an amendment to the convention to deal with a situation where you don't have a response after a certain amount of time, and that will be considered by the Conference of the Parties, which is the governing body, the decision-making body. That will be considered when it meets face-to-face, which at the moment is planned for June. The issues that parties will be looking at. Another element or another attempt to try and help parties, because to reassure you, this is a problem that quite a few countries have faced in the past. And so there is some guidance that has been provided by the Implementation and Compliance Committee that could be of assistance if you have those kind of challenges. If it's a situation where you are referring to a state of transit, and the state of transit does not reply to your notification, then what you could do is you could have a look on the convention website under countries. There is a section that allows you to look at what measures a country has put in place. And so if the country has notified that they don't require consent in the event of transit. And I'm happy to walk through where that information can be found on the website as well. But if they have notified that they don't require consent for transit, then the movement can proceed after the 60 days. So that is also a solution in those circumstances. I think in terms of the second question, you were referring to the ban amendment. And indeed, the idea behind the ban amendment was to try and prevent dumping, to prevent movements to countries where there's either not a wish to receive those wastes, or there isn't the capacity to receive those wastes. And it does cover more than illegal traffic. It is a decision made by the country to say we do not wish to receive these kind of wastes. So that already puts an obligation on any exporting state not to send the wastes to Iraq in that circumstance. So that does give an additional level of protection, and it builds on the convention's provisions about illegal traffic. It is not for cases of illegal traffic. It's for movements from what at the time were considered the developed countries to other states. So I hope I have provided further information in response to those two questions, but I am also very happy to have a wander around the website and to show and share where additional information can be found in relation to decisions that countries have taken. Thank you.
I think that might be useful, Yvonne, if I may. Tomorrow, when you present, maybe, I don't know if you would like to take a few minutes to just show them the relevant areas in the website that they could go to.
Happy to.
That might be useful. I mean, I don't know how much time we have of you today, but I mean, we could also come back to it after lunch before we start the group work. So then it's fresh in people's minds. It's also fresh in your minds. It should not take for more than 5-10 minutes to kind of just familiarize them with the website and specific sites that they would be relevant for them, if that's okay with you.
I'm in your hands, so I'm happy to walk through after lunch or tomorrow, or even both, as you wish.
Great. No, let's do it after lunch while it's fresh in our minds. So perfect. Let's do that. So let's go. Let's have another round of questions if there are any from the floor. And Mike, please feel free to jump in and respond as well based on your own experience from both industry and also from obviously from the sort of regulator side as well. Please go ahead.
Do that, Marisol, absolutely.
Yvonne, on a related note, I wanted to see real quick, are there any forms of contracts provided for countries that are signatories of any of the three conventions that would like to make a contract with a country that is not part of them? Are there means that are provided on the website that we could also show everyone?
Thank you for the question, Bella. There isn't an example of a contract because it would also depend very much from one country to the next. The legal systems, the requirements, some have fewer or more requirements in terms of but there are elements within some of the guidance documents that I can certainly pull up as an example. So I believe within the the guide to the control system. There is, for example, some information that could be of assistance, but it isn't in the format of an example contract. One thing that is important to consider that is raised in all of our guidance is also the issue of, and this ties very neatly into some of the points raised earlier on, the issue of insurance bonds and guarantees. So looking at putting in place insurance, putting in place any guarantees so that if things don't go according to plan, that you do have some kind of a backup to help address any problems. There is also a practical manual that could be of assistance to look at what you need to put in place for that kind of a contract. But again, it's more in the format of a manual rather than an example contract itself.
I see. Thank you for that clarification. Are there any questions left from the audience? We have about 5 to 10 minutes left. Any other questions?
While people are thinking still, maybe I just jump in here and go back to the first question that was asked regarding norm. And in addition to what Yvonne had already mentioned in terms of guidance about norm, because it is outside, if I understood correctly, outside the BRS convention. Mike, can you just weigh in based on your experience, how operators and governments handle this type of waste?
Sure, Maris. We're talking particularly, I think, is it about radioactive material, radioactive waste? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, it is a matter of, as it were, good practice or best practice that the sorts of material we're talking about, the sorts of tools that we're talking about, some of which are used, for example, on pipelines to review and evaluate the integrity of welds and what have you within the pipelines. These sorts of tools are expensive. The material used is expensive. So there is a high degree of reuse of the radioactive tools and materials. But then it is good practice for those international companies who are providing this sort of material, providing this sort of equipment, that within the contract between the supplier and the client, typically the oil company, that there would be a take-back clause contractually. So that often is the case, and that would have to be done in compliance with all safety precautions, the appropriate labeling and packaging and everything else. But yeah, that mechanism does exist contractually. I'm not sure, again, because that falls under the IAEA guidelines, but certainly industry practice is that these materials, this equipment, can be taken back by the supplier after it's used. So there is that avenue to explore also.
But Mike, what happens to the radioactive waste streams that are generated from drilling, for example, from the production end? So it's not necessarily what you're referring to that brought in by the producer.
Absolutely, yeah. Regarding norm waste that is generated by the drilling activities where we have radioactive material naturally occurring in the underlying bedrock, which is brought to the surface, and then which can accumulate in pipelines and what have you, then again, there shouldn't be any surprises in terms of it should be known in advance from the exploratory drilling. They being the companies should have very good information and data on the type of rock through which they're drilling. They should know in advance if norm is going to be an issue and make the necessary provisions. And that means, and we're talking generally about low levels of radiation, of radioactivity, but nonetheless, that material can't be routinely handled and cannot be co-disposed with other waste types. So there would need to be proper storage of this material. If it's offshore, being bought onshore, separate storage, same onshore, that it would be separately identified, labeled and stored, and then would have to go to a dedicated disposal facility. The dedicated disposal facility would have to be in compliance with the national authority responsible for radioactive material, which usually is a dedicated authority, usually separate and distinct from other types of waste and hazardous waste, as is the case with the Basel Convention, doesn't actually cater for it because of the very specialized nature of the material. So in summary, then, there will be national guidelines that the generator will have to comply with, and that will mean separate storage, transportation, and ultimately disposal. And disposal really is a bit of a misnomer in terms of radioactive waste. It's not disposal as such, it's more like safe long-term storage, which typically can be done, depending on what's locally available, but within deep mine shafts, within deep salt quarries, which are then engineered and upgraded with containing walls and radioactive excluding material built in within the retaining structure. So that's a bit of a meandering response to a good question, but absolutely there will be national guidelines from the agency responsible for radioactive material and radioactive waste that the generator must comply with.
Okay, very interesting. I think Yvonne had wanted to come in as well. Yvonne, you should have the floor, I think.
Yes. Thank you so much, Marisol. And I just wanted to raise, because Mike has touched on a very tricky point that seems to be being faced by many countries at the moment. And here, I think the importance of having a waste management plan is also really key, because something that from the Secretariat side we have been made aware of recently is the issue of wastes that are that the country initially does not realize is radioactive. And this, in particular, with norms, we have come across this problem in the past. That the difficulties of identifying, and that could be something that is included within a waste management plan in terms of having some kind of a strategy to check whether there is a certain radioactivity in the wastes that are to be treated, to have every now and again perhaps random tests, but to look at some kind of a strategy for identification of this potential problem, because we know that there have been situations where wastes have gone from one country to another country, and it is only on arrival at the port of import that they have been identified as radioactive, which of course is highly problematic for all of the countries that are involved in that particular movement. So just to stress that it is a problem, and there does need to be a strong link between the waste management and the national criteria for management of radioactive wastes. So thank you.
Marisol, if I could add, just to endorse Yvonne's points, that absolutely, where there's a situation that radioactive waste norm is going to be generated, it absolutely must be captured in the waste management plan. The companies will be well aware of the types of geology, the material through which they're drilling. And the waste management plan, when submitted for review and ultimate approval, should also be shared with the appropriate nuclear entity within the government of Iraq for its review and for its approval of the proposed measures to be taken. So absolutely should be captured in the plan and should be reviewed and endorsed accordingly by the appropriate authority.
Great. Were there any other further questions from the floor?
نعم عندي سؤال فقط واحد.
I have a question, please. If the waste movement pipeline is or passes through several countries and they are not a signatory country to the Basel Convention, so would this country or should this country abide by the Basel Convention?
If I may, yes. If I believe the question was if we have a transit movement through a state that isn't a party, and the convention does provide for that. What it says is that if it's just a transit through, then there has to be the notification. So you have to inform that state that there is this movement of hazardous waste or other waste, but there isn't the requirement of consent. So there has to be an information sharing with that country, but it's not the same requirement as it would be for a state of import, for example. So if you have the convention does provide for it, but how you deal with it depends on if it's being imported to that state or if it's just transiting through the state. If it's just transiting, all you need to do is notify. If it is being imported, then you would need to put in place an agreement or an arrangement that ensures the same environmentally sound management provisions as the convention.
On that note, do you think you could elaborate on what occurs if the movement document gets lost along the way, particularly in a country that is not signed on to an agreement?
Usually, the Secretariat isn't involved in those at that stage of the movement, but we are aware that a lot of countries do have electronic systems, and so there should be a possibility of recuperating those documents at some stage, or at least a duplicate in one of the states that is concerned. So that's not a problem that we have been made aware of, and I know that there is a push at the moment for electronic notification of movement documents across the board for the Basel Convention. So that work is ongoing. And as I say, the majority of countries at least have the electronic, the soft copy of the document saved, or are using already an electronic system. So for the moment, as far as we're aware, that's not a real problem. But quite often we're not involved in that stage of the movement.
If I may ask if there's any other questions of the floor.
If not, I think we will go ahead and wrap up. Okay. I think we will, of course, continue this conversation in the next two more days and this afternoon. So if we can go ahead then and wrap up and have a break for lunch. We also need some mental and physical break. So we will break now. What we will come back to in the afternoon.
Marisol, sorry, Marisol. At least we can complete the groups. After that, we go to lunch. Please.
We will do the group. We will do the group
I
work.
talk with Zach regarding that.
We will do the group work after lunch. Because
Yeah, we can. Yeah, no, before lunch. We can't start before lunch.
No, we cannot do the group work before lunch because it takes too long. It will take too long to do the group work and have the group presentations. So I think we will break now because we also need to have a break with our team. So we will break for lunch. We come back at 1 p.m. and we will have
Okay.
we don't have any more presentations, but we will do the group work in the afternoon. Okay, and then we will also have group work presentations, because this will take about an hour and a half or 2 hours. So I think it will be too long to wait to have lunch.
Okay.
All right. So we will come back in 1 hour. So if you can come back at 2 p.m.
Okay.
your time, and our team will also come back at that time. And then we will start the group work. Now, if you please check your email, so you can already take a look at the group work number 1 from Chidima. She sent by email. So it's good if you can already review the group work, so we can start right away and also then finish on time. Okay. So with that, I thank all of you and thank our presenters for today. I'll come back in 1 hour.
اوكي شكرا. يعني هسه احنا مثل ما اساتذه يعني، بس احنا ان شاء الله على هسه حنبدي 1:30 يبدي الغداء، 2:15 نرجع ونكمل 3:15. يعني انا حاولت وياهم قلت يعني حتى دزيت لهم ايميل عبالنا نكمل لحد الغداء، بس شوي هم يريدون يستراحون. فان شاء الله هسه احنا على 2:15 نرجع ونكمل على 3:30. تمام. لان عندنا بعد جروبات لازم نقسم 4 أو 5 فرق عمل، وكل فريق عمل شخص يقدم شنو حيتفقون عليه وفق المحاضرات الصباحيه، يعني ندمج ما بين يعني العمل اللي قالوا به في الحقول يعني النفطيه، وما بين اتفاقيه روتردام وما بين بازل. فان شاء الله على 2:15 نرجع. شكرا.